Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Hey Kristen, thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time as well. How's it going?
I, it's going pretty good. I get to talk about Hamlet. So,
Great.
it's a good Wednesday. So,
Perfect.
I mean, I got a master's in English, so Shakespeare always top of mind in my life even now. For you, what was your way into Hamlet prior to working on this? Was there a film version that you had kind of identified with prior to doing this?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't really have much of a relationship with it. That probably sounds sacrilegious to a English
I love that because you
master's
never hear
graduate.
that.
Yeah, no, if I'm being really honest, I mean, I had the same kind of experience of Shakespeare as most people in this country, which is that you have to study it at school to some
Yeah.
extent. And, some people are lucky enough to kind of have the intellect or the teacher or the experience where they really break through with it and form a proper connection with it. Um, Whereas I actually, like a lot of people, kind of had a surface appreciation of it, but felt like I wasn't quite intellectual, smart, whatever it is, enough, this enough, that enough to kind of really break through with it on a deeper level. And probably left school thinking, okay, well, it's cool, but I'm not one of those people. I'm not quote unquote Shakespeare person. So it was an interesting experience when Riz emailed me. We'd been making a short film and
Mhm.
we'd finished it. 6 months later, he emailed me and said, I want to share with you this Hamlet adaptation I've been adapting. And when I read it, my assumption was that I wouldn't, be able to connect with it in a deep enough way to go on this journey. But actually, I found it kind of personal, surprising, relevant, kind of timeless in its themes, and appreciated the kind of beauty of the language in a different way to that I had before. So, yeah, I didn't have this kind of pre-existing relationship with it really. I had to, in fact, do the opposite, which was get my head around the idea of me coming at this thing. But actually, I became excited about the idea because I thought, okay, well, I started to think, okay, what is the barrier between me and Shakespeare? What has it been? And it's probably that I was conditioned to having a kind of conditioned to it being an intellectual experience and not an emotional one. You go to the theater and you watch it and you're kind of stroking your chin and observing this kind of plot take place, and the language is very grand and formal and revered, and sometimes that ends up being the barrier itself. You think, okay, but when I stripped all that away and started reading it, I was like, okay, there's an emotional experience to be had here, and what if we can do the opposite of my memory of those school trips going to see it on the stage? And what if we can connect really psychologically and really emotionally with him? A lot of the filmmaking I've done up until that point was about being on the shoulder of a character and being really, really intimately connected with them, breathing the air with them and things like that. What if we could have that experience even with a Shakespeare character, even with this sacred formal text? And as soon as I started thinking about that, it became an exciting challenge. And I thought, okay, well, the reality is I'm never going to be the most intellectual guy in the room. I'm not a Shakespeare scholar. So I just have to connect with it in the way I can, which is, yeah, go on this emotionally led journey with him. And hopefully, if we do that well, then the actual text, just follows actually. And what's been the most heartening thing I think about this film's release is that there's been a lot of people who have thought of themselves as not Shakespeare people, who've connected with it in a new way, to adaptations that have come before. Of course, I've since watched all of the Hamlet adaptations and become a fan, a great fan and great admirer you know of them in all their myriad ways. The Olivier one, the 1964 Russian adaptation, which is really sort of striking and beautiful, and yeah, you know, they're all kind of magnificent, really. And it became fascinating. But what's happened is my relationship with Hamlet and Shakespeare itself has changed through this process, which has been really interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that because I mean I grew up with the Ethan Hawke, he's my go-to Hamlet, the millennial Hamlet.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And watching and having seen so many of them, Brannon and all of those, I loved this interpretation because yeah, it kind of removes the trappings of the fact that you're watching a play. I
Mhm.
think it gets at something in the way everybody's acting and the way the dialogue is played and the grittiness and the Stewart's cinematography. I mean, it gets at something very different, which I appreciated because I think there's so many versions. You're assuming you're going to see kind of the same thing or that they all have this through line. And this one I
Mhm.
don't think has that same through line connection to the past ones, which I appreciated. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Kristen. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I think we thought, okay, if we're gonna bring our, you know, film into this kind of canon of already very revered adaptations, we have to at least try and do something a little bit fresh with it,
Yeah.
and find a new kind of energy with which to inject this experience. And of course, it has the cultural specificity too, which kind of brings another layer of kind of, yeah, fresh
Yeah.
energy to that canon, hopefully.
I have to ask about probably my favorite sequence in the movie. And again, having seen other versions and seen the mousetrap, the play within the play, performed so many different ways, I think your version might be my favorite because it's beautiful to look at. It does something new. It doesn't, some productions of the mousetrap play take things literally and it kind of looks hokey. And this one kind of it's more. Talk a little bit about filming that, putting that together. I'm all for anything that showcases choreography. We need more filming of choreography. How did you want to capture that sequence?
Yeah, well, I'm really happy that that connected with you, that scene, and that you ask about it. Yeah. I'm also a huge fan of choreography. Yeah. Uh, my mum's a huge flamenco fan. And there's a flamenco festival in London every year. And as a teenager, I was like kind of semi-dragged to that. And then after a couple of years, I was like wanting to go to that. And then like I started going and seeing more choreography, different choreography, and it's a huge, I love it, yeah. And it's kind of in different ways infused all of my work. I think there's something just so special and captivating about choreography and movement like that. So yeah, we you know, there were so many things that felt fitting about having a danced version, a choreographed version of this thing. First of all, in our version, as you know, of Hamlet, we see the wedding. In
Mhm.
most versions, Claudius and Gertrude are already married, but
Yeah.
actually, in our version, they get married in the film. And it's very, very common to have a piece of choreography or a dance performance at an Asian wedding. And that can take any form. That could be like three of your 15-year-old cousins having practiced the routine in their bedroom for like 3 or 4 days and come and do it. And it's really sweet and nice and low key. Or it can be a showy, hired dances kind of thing, like this one, if they're really wanting to splash the cash. But either way, a choreographed performance is rooted in the tradition and the kind of the fabric of Asian weddings. Also, as you know, the mousetrap, it's really cool, but it's one of the more antiquated feeling parts of the play,
Yeah.
right? It's like this even older story comes along to the court about Hecuba and things and does this and they perform it. Even the idea of actors coming to the court and performing a small play feels a little bit disconnected with our reality. So there seem to be many compelling reasons to do a choreographed piece that stripped away all that antiquated text and rooted this idea of movement at the Asian wedding. And then we were lucky enough to, Riz and I had both independently worked with this amazing choreographer called Akram Khan in the past. He's one of the, world's most kind of revered contemporary choreographers, certainly in the UK. Um, he's also, British Asian like us. And so it was a no-brainer to ask him. We didn't know if he'd have the time because he's a seriously busy guy, but yeah, to our joy, he wanted to come on board. And my brief to him was really, really simple. It was like, I want to turn the dream wedding into a nightmare. So this piece begins as this kind of beautiful, slightly saccharine, actually, like lovely piece of music and choreography, and then obviously it descends into this slightly hellish nightmare. And he took that brief and just ran with it. It was so incredible what he did. And it was such a joy to shoot. I mean, I would shoot choreography all day or, all day
I'd
long.
watch it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. But it was such a joy, and we really, we obviously it's a British indie film. We didn't have the time and the resources that we always wanted, but we really committed a lot of time to that, to getting the coverage, and not only telling the story of the dance, but telling the story of this kind of, you know, observational game of happening through it of Claudius and Hamlet and actually everyone else. And it was such a joy to shoot and cut actually. And yeah, it's a part of the film I'm really proud of, and I really appreciate that you kind of highlighted it. Yeah.
I have to ask about working with Riz on this, who, Hamlet is very much a problematic figure to the ladies. Some have said he's the original fuckboy. And here I loved watching how, he plays with some of the line readings, and for once I actually sympathized with. I'm like, I empathize with this guy. Talk a little bit about working with him and putting a new spin on a character that I think has kind of dug his own grave historically and literarily in many previous versions.
Yeah, no, completely. Well, I think I mean, first of all, working with Riz, it's an amazing experience. Like I say, the short film was the first time we collaborated, but I was obviously very familiar with his work, huge fan of his work. He's the kind of actor I would have, wanted to work with because he consumes these roles. He doesn't just play them, he kind of becomes them, and he takes this kind of very, very lived in, embodied kind of physical approach to acting, which I really admire. He gives everything. There's nothing kind of intellectual or performative about what he does. He's just being it and living it, and it's amazing. And yeah, so the idea of him playing Hamlet was kind of too compelling to to deny. But yeah, you're right. Hamlet's a completely problematic character at points, and we didn't want to kind of like sugarcoat that, I think. But it's really a compliment that you managed to find empathy there as well. Because yeah, he's a big fuck up, isn't he? He's like
Yeah,
he's heavily flawed. That's the interesting thing about this story, which feels very contemporary. He's deeply ashamed and repulsed by all the kind of corruption and duplicity around him, but he's also completely a part of it. He's
yeah.
complicit in it. He's an enabler of it. He's a beneficiary of it. And and that feels like it's speaking to something quite honest about our contemporary identity, actually.
Yeah.
We're both grossed out by everything around us, and we're also completely a part of it. Um,
Previous iterations, there's a cockiness to the character that I don't think we see here, and it made me start wondering how much of that is because white men have played the role, and there's this
yeah,
air
that's
of
interesting.
privilege.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, a lot of these tropes of characters we tried to kind of think about in the development and rehearsal process and kind of strip away. And I think you're right. There is that cockiness there. What I'm not saying he's a good guy, but there's a vulnerability about Riz's
Yeah.
Hamlet, like a real one, an authentic vulnerability, which is kind of interesting. And and a loneliness about him, which is interesting as well. Yeah. We kind of perhaps what removes some of that cockiness is that we strip away a lot of his best mates and his like circle. So he's actually quite isolated, and maybe that's through empathy comes in. But also we thought about Gertrude. There's this history of Gertrude being played in this kind of slightly blithe, completely ignorant, slightly moronic at times kind of way. It's like, oh, everything's what could possibly be the problem, Hamlet? Everything's great here, and I'm super in love, and I can't really see a problem with anything. And why are you so down, etc. It seems kind of when you look at it through a more naturalistic contemporary lens, it seems slightly absurd that she wouldn't understand that. So, Sheba and everything, we ended up trying to find this more conflicted and pained kind of version of Gertrude, which felt kind of truer to. So yeah, we tried to let go of these tropes through which characters are sometimes, played.
Well, they're giving me the hook. I could probably talk to you about this all day. Thank you so much for nerding out with me about
Oh, it's
Hamlet.
a
I
real pleasure.
appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic questions, and
Oh, thank
I
you.
really appreciate you taking the time to watch it and think about it so thoughtfully.